Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm not quite sure what it is about illness and death in particular that causes us to remove filters and stoppages and blockades and allows us to express and to emote in a much clearer form with people who matter the most in our lives. And this week, the week between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is a week where all of our physical health might be fine, but where our health stands for the year to come, if we're fastidious about how it is that we look at the notion of this time, hangs in the balance. We find out as we read in Unetana Tokef, Mi yichya mi yamut, who will live and who will die, because on Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, on Rosh Hashanah it is written, V'yom tzom kippur yechatemun, and on the day of Yom Kippur, it is inscribed. So why is it that we pour out our hearts in moments like this and tell people our innermost feelings when we're most scared, or when we're most sick, or when we're most vulnerable? But on a random Thursday, it's not the same. I want to take you back 29 years. The date is July the 17th, 1996. We're in a small kibbutz area in the south of Israel, near Mitzpeh Ramon, which is the Great Crater. And I was leading a USY mission of about 65 kids, where we went for 10 days to Poland and then 5 weeks in Israel. These kids were all seniors in high school, about to be seniors in high school, and I was one of the tour leaders. I got called away from this group. I was told I needed to call home, and when I did, I was told by my parents quite unexpectedly that my oldest brother, Gabriel, had died by suicide. I immediately knew I had to come home, and I had to go say goodbye to these kids who at the time I thought I was really never going to see again. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, yet alone if I would return to this group or not. And I gathered the group together in a room that wasn't much bigger than this, and I told them what had happened without any of the details, and I gave them a speech about Judaism, Israel, and love. Now, for all the money in the world, I couldn't tell you what I said. But I'm pretty sure that every kid who was on that trip, because they told me, can repeat almost verbatim of every word that I said. But there was something that just spewed out, that just came out in those moments because of the vulnerability I was feeling, the shock to my system, and the importance of sharing something really deep in that moment. But here I was, leading these kids and shaping their lives. Why didn't I tell them this before that news had broke? Why didn't I give them something about hope and Judaism and Israel on the second day of the trip or the 10th day? And the truth is, it was probably a mix between where I was and how ready they were to hear it in light of the news that they just heard. That someone that they had grown a connection with, someone who was teaching them, had to abruptly leave the trip and who was going through a trauma in their lives. There was a professor at Carnegie Mellon by the name of Randy Pausch. I know I've spoken about him before. And Randy Pausch was one of the engineers who basically, along with Steve Jobs and others, came up with the whole notion of Pixar. What he did for animation and how animation works is the way so many people today enjoy the movies for animated films. And people who were really into that level of engineering and people who wanted to go into animated cinema, they knew that you needed to go to Carnegie Mellon and to study with Randy Pausch to make this happen. And there was a phenomenon happening in the academic world called a last lecture. A last lecture. And the idea was that if you were a scientist, you were a mathematician, you were a obstetrician, you were a gastroenterologist, you were an accountant, you were an attorney, whatever it was that you did, whatever your discipline was in the world of academia, you would give a lecture about the most important things in that world as if it were your last lecture to give. And people would come. So if you were a historian and someone was a famous historian and they were giving the last lecture, you would think that they would distill that lecture of all the most important values into an hour about history on their particular discipline, and they would share it with those who would listen. And normally a last lecture is not limited to the students in the course. It's invited to all the faculty in the community to come to, and it's a thing of great honor. Randy Pausch is giving his last lecture, and he has a phenomenal turnout, and he doesn't talk about animation at all. He doesn't talk about engineering at all. He talks about life. He talks about his spouse. He talks about his children. And he talks about his value system. And at the end of the lecture, he tells everyone that he has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and that he has a very short time to live. And that for him, the notion of a last lecture was bigger than Pixar, bigger than engineering. It was, what lessons do I want to instill on my students and my community that will affect them forever? What Michael Goodman read today in the Torah was, in essence, a form of a last lecture by Moses. Moses knows he's going to die. And what does Moses do? He gathers Bnei Israel together, and he tells them the most important things you need to know. Don't forget to write a Torah, meaning keep these laws. Don't forget to love each other. Don't forget to always set your coordinates, to be dialed in, to draw closer to the land of Israel. Don't forget the morality system that we have established that fit and jive with these laws. And don't forget the notion of belief in one God. All the core parts of Judaism are shared on that mountain as soon as he knows he won't make it into the promised land. As a rabbi and as a human being, I've had the opportunity, which has been a blessing and a curse, to sit at the bedside of people who I love very much and people in our community who I love very much as they are leaving this world. 2 times in my life, knowing that my loved ones were going to die very soon, I sat with those people, was my father and my cousin Howard, and I was able to have not exactly a lecture, but that last talk, those things you want to say. And countless times as a rabbi, I sat there while you had those conversations with people who mattered most in your life. And I only wondered, as I did for myself, why didn't I have those conversations before? Why didn't you have those conversations before? Why do we respond differently in the last lecture phase of our lives, like Moses did, like Randy Pausch did, like I did? I think there is an obvious answer, which is if we talked like this every day, it would lose its potency. And that part of the notion of illness and death not only takes away filters, but it opens portals. And in those portals, things can penetrate that otherwise can't. And I think if it weren't the end of the Torah and Moses were giving this speech, it would be impactful, but not nearly to the same degree. I think if I were sharing those words of loving Israel, loving Judaism, and loving each other to those young, impressionable minds entering the 12th grade, it would have been meaningful, but not nearly as meaningful as me having to exit under the circumstances that I was forced to leave under. And if Randy Pausch had said those things in the classroom, they might have sunk into a few hearts, but they would have glossed over many of eyes who might have said, I took this class to learn engineering, not about life. But when he shared that news, it penetrated differently. Well, that's one of the obvious reasons. But perhaps the other obvious reason is because we don't do it, we don't know how we will respond. And maybe it's a good reminder to each of us that when we read Unetana Tokef, mi yichyeh mi yamut, b'Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, v'Yom Tzom Kippur yechatemun, who will live and who will die. And Rosh Hashanah, it's written. On Yom Kippur, it is sealed. None of us get a peek at that ledger God's keeping. None of us are able to say, oh, this one, that will be on February 12th. And this one, March 9th. This one, June 17th. None of us know what the reality of that decree is until next Rosh Hashanah, when we find out we made it, and we don't spend much time thanking God for that. Instead, we just go through the process all over again. So maybe if we live our lives as if every day or every week is those 10 days of repentance, is those days for us to be reflective, to be thoughtful, to share words that can penetrate and to open up portals that allows that level of penetration, maybe we can actually have the most impact on the lives of those that matter the most to us in our world. It can change us and it can change them. It sure did for B'nai Yisrael, for the Israelites, when Moses gave that lecture. It sure did for Randy Pausch. I hope it can for us too. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.